Why do people comply with oppression? Why do so many people willingly, or even enthusiastically, comply with systems that harm them or others? This disturbing question sits at the heart of today's discussion. We're delving deep into the psychology behind compliance with oppression, whether it stems from authoritarian power, oligarchical systems, or populist movements. By exploring groundbreaking experiments, key psychological theories, and modern political realities like the MAGA movement, we seek to illuminate how oppression thrives, and perhaps more importantly, how we can resist it. Ready your critical minds. Let's dissect the mechanisms behind obedience, helplessness, and propaganda that keep these systems alive. And don't forget to stay until the end for a call that might just empower your perspective. What does it mean to comply with oppression? Compliance isn't just about obedience, it's a blend of submission, normalization, and ultimately participation. People comply either actively by following oppressive orders or passively by failing to resist. Over time, these systems thrive on conformity, turning ordinary individuals into cogs in an unjust machine. Sometimes compliance happens under visible coercion. Other times, it's far more insidious, wrapped in narratives that obscure injustice and make oppression feel normal, even inevitable. To understand why people comply, we first need to explore human psychology. In the early 1960s, social psychologist Stanley Milgram conducted an infamous experiment to study obedience to authority. In this study, participants were instructed to deliver electric shocks to a person in another room whenever they gave a wrong answer. What participants didn't know was that the shocks were fake, and the person on the receiving end was an actor. Here's the shocking part. Most participants continued administering shocks, even when the actor screamed in pain or begged them to stop, all because an authoritative figure in a lab coat insisted they must. Milgram's conclusion was deeply sobering. Ordinary people, even those who consider themselves good or ethical, are disturbingly likely to obey an authority figure, even to the point of harming others. Now pause and think about what that means beyond the laboratory. How often do oppressive systems rely on obedience? Governments, corporations, police forces, militaries. They function because countless people follow orders, even when those orders perpetuate harm. When people comply without question, their moral compass is deactivated by the perceived legitimacy of authority. This obedience is one of the cornerstones of oppressive systems. Milgram's study is just the tip of the iceberg. Another experiment, the Stanford Prison Experiment by Philip Zimbardo, further demonstrates how quickly people conform to abusive power dynamics. In this study, college students were randomly assigned the roles of prisoners and guards in a simulated jail. What started as a mock exercise rapidly spiraled into disturbing reality. The guards became sadistic, exerting demeaning and abusive control over the prisoners, who in turn became demoralized and submissive. What does this teach us? Oppression doesn't just flow from top-down authoritarian commands. It is sustained by people who adopt roles of power or submission within a structure. Individuals given power can become enforcers of injustice. In real-world systems of oppression, whether authoritarian governments, exploitative workplaces, or unjust societal hierarchies, these roles are deeply ingrained. People assume roles that perpetuate these systems, often without recognizing how far they've strayed from their moral values. But what happens to those who find themselves in the role of the oppressed? Why don't more people resist? To answer this, we turn to another key psychological phenomenon: learned helplessness. Learned helplessness is a concept based on experiments in which animals, subjected to repeated negative situations they couldn't escape, eventually stopped trying, even when escape became possible. They simply gave up hope. Humans, unfortunately, behave in similar ways in oppressive situations. When people are subjected to prolonged abuse, discrimination, or systemic injustice, they start believing that their actions won't make a difference. They lose the will to fight back, and compliance follows. This isn't weakness, it's conditioning. Oppressive systems understand this and exploit it fully. By making resistance feel futile, through relentless crackdowns, rigged systems, or a lack of visible change, authoritarian regimes and oligarchies wear people down until compliance feels like the only option. If psychology primes people to obey, assume roles, and lose hope, propaganda is the tool that ties it all together. Propaganda weaponizes narratives to justify authority, normalize oppression, and demonize dissent. History is rife with examples. In authoritarian regimes, propaganda promotes loyalty by presenting the rulers as protectors and the dissenters as threats. In oligarchies, propaganda often masquerades as aspirational storytelling, convincing people that the system is fair and their suffering is a personal failure, not systemic injustice. Modern propaganda has evolved in subtle, sophisticated ways. Today's tools range from state-owned media to algorithm-driven echo chambers online. Entire movements are built on disinformation strategies that distract people from oppression and redirect their anger towards scapegoats, a tactic we see prominently in contemporary politics. Let's take the MAGA movement and the rise of Donald Trump as a living, breathing example of these dynamics in action. How does a movement secure widespread, unwavering loyalty, despite policies and rhetoric that often harm the very communities it claims to serve? The answer lies in leveraging authority, fostering obedience, and deploying relentless propaganda. The Make America Great Again slogan presents a powerful but flawed emotional appeal. It romanticizes a past built on economic exploitation and systemic inequality as something to reclaim. Trump's direct, authoritative communication style framed him as a strongman who would protect his followers, even as many of his policies enriched elites while leaving the working class struggling. Propaganda played a starring role. The MAGA movement weaponized narratives that villainized the other, whether immigrants, political opponents, or dissenters. Misinformation spread quickly, creating echo chambers where disobedience to the movement's ideals meant betrayal or weakness. Combine that with learned helplessness, years of frustration from those who felt abandoned by traditional politics, and you have the perfect recipe for compliance. Many MAGA supporters see no alternative, no better way to fight for their interests. So they cling to the system in place, even when it ultimately betrays them. By now it's clear that compliance with oppression stems from a tangled web of psychological conditioning and systemic manipulation. So what can we do? Awareness is the first step. Just understanding the mechanisms of compliance, obedience, roles, helplessness propaganda can begin to weaken their control. Ask yourself tough questions. Do you question authority figures or do you defer to them by default? Have you swallowed propaganda without realizing it? Have you ever felt helpless and stopped trying to resist oppression? Recognizing these patterns within yourself and within society is crucial, because once you see the strings, you can start cutting them. You can resist normalization. You can push back against roles that make you complicit. You can demand truth over propaganda. Resistance isn't easy. It takes clarity, courage, and connection with others who share the goal of change. But every authoritarian system depends on compliance to survive. Dismantling it starts with saying, no more. We've covered a lot today. Milgram's chilling obedience experiments, Zimbardo's demonstration of power roles in the Stanford Prison Experiment, the erosion of hope caused by learned helplessness, and the toxic flow of propaganda that sustains oppression. We've explored how these forces operate not only in history, but in today's world, from authoritarian governments to movements like MAGA. This video isn't just about understanding the mechanisms of oppression, it's about inspiring action. By recognizing how these systems function, we can begin to dismantle them from within. We can choose resistance over obedience, courage over helplessness, truth over propaganda. If this content challenged your thinking, don't let it stop here. Share these ideas, continue the conversation, and remember to like and subscribe for more thought-provoking content. And as always, eat the rich.